That's great.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. We are really excited to be here today on Friday, the 6th of June. And I know I have to tell you it's June because it just doesn't feel like it, but so glad to see you all here. My colleague and co-convener, Harriet Richmond, will be with us very shortly. She's just had one of those moments with her laptop that's just decided to crash. So what I'm going to do is just start, going to share a slide with you and just introduce the meeting, and hopefully within that time Harriet will be back with us and we'll be able to introduce our lovely speakers who are sat in front of you. So just hold there for a moment. I'll just bring this slide up and you can see. So this is the welcome to the Non-Traditional Research Methods Network, and our event today. And I'd just like to say hello and welcome to everyone that's joined us in the virtual room today, and also a warm welcome to those people that will be accessing the recording from this seminar after the event. And thank you for making time for yourselves and us in your busy lives currently. Our seminar today presents two speakers with whom Harriet will introduce momentarily. That's when her laptop works once more. And I'd like to remind everyone that the seminar runs from 1:45 to 3:45, and we will be recording both sections of this seminar. We will be taking a break midway for discussion. So please, if you have any thoughts, feelings, suggestions, recommendations, pop them in the chat or hold on to them for consultation and consideration midway through the presentation and at the end. And I appreciate that. Thank you very much. So we will, of course, be monitoring the chat, and microphones will need to be off in between. Hopefully Harriet has joined us once more in the room. I'm going to bring this slide down, unless, of course, you've not been with us before, and I'm just going to give you a brief overview as to what the Non-Traditional Research Methods Network is about. And you can see that it was launched in 2021 and was born out of 3 colleagues who were really interested in research methods that were innovative and unusual, or as we were framed as unorthodox. And we recognise that not all research methods suit all contexts. So we decided that we'd welcome the opportunity to be exposed to different ways of using research and research methods that are non-traditional in the areas within which we work, which is multi-professional and interprofessional. So hence the NTRM was born, and what our philosophy and ways of working is about providing a space for meaningful cross-disciplinary research debate and to encourage more creativity in this aspect of research design. And here we are, as you note, 2025, 4 years later, enjoying and sharing the NTRM with you. So hopefully Harriet's back with us. So I'm just going to bring this slide back down and return to the room. And lo and behold, as if by magic, she's here.
Thanks ever so much, Jackie, and apologies everyone for my late entrance, but my laptop decided to crash at precisely 1:45. Anyway, thank you all for joining us. We know how precious time is at this time of year, and we couldn't think of a better way for you to spend your time in the company of our 2 speakers today. We're absolutely delighted to welcome Professor Emily Henderson and Julia Römer. So let me tell you a little bit about them. So Professor Emily Henderson is a professor and director of the Doctoral Education and Academia Research Centre here at the University of Warwick. She's co-editor of the academic blog Conference Inference and co-convener of the Diary Method Community, an online community of practice for diary researchers. And I understand that there's a few of you here today, so welcome to the NTRM. Professor Henderson's current research projects using diary method include a 4-year project on institutional approaches to widening participation in India and an evaluation project of the Warwick Pathway Programme for Black researchers. She is co-editor of Exploring Diary Methods in Higher Education Research. Julia Römer is a PhD researcher based in the Innovation School at the Glasgow School of Art. Currently completing her doctoral research, she has explored how primary school learners are experiencing sustainability education through the lens of diary and creative engagement. Her research interests are creative, design-led and participatory methods with children and young people. Julia is an active member of the Diary Method community and also the co-convener of the Creative Methods in Education for the Sustainability Reading Group. Welcome, Emily and Julia.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Harriet and Jackie, for that introduction and for the invitation to join this really awesome forum. Really lovely, both the spirit and the kind of subject of the series. So thank you so much. And Julia, I don't know if you just want to just say hello while I'm sharing the slides as well.
Yes, of course. Hello, everyone. It's good to see also some familiar names in the participants list. I'm very thankful to be here today. And yeah, I guess we are both, Emily and I, looking forward to be sharing more about the diary method in both our very different projects with you.
Thanks, Julia. All right, so yes, we're absolutely delighted to be part of this event today. And yeah, our session overall, and we're combining our kind of presentations together so that to create a slightly more interactive formula today. And we're presenting on Whose Diary Method, Exploring Diary Studies with different participant groups. And I particularly wanted to collaborate with Julia on this event because her diary study was so very different from the diary studies I've done with academics. And I thought we'd make a really good combination for the audience to have a think about diary method if you're new to it. So a quick overview of the kind of structure of the session. So for those of you who already know quite a lot about diary method, and I know there are some in the audience, you can have a little meditate during the first few minutes where I'm going to give an introduction to diary method and to the diary method community. But then we'll move swiftly on to hear about Julia's diary method project, one of the diary projects that I've engaged with. And then we'll pause for a discussion about the challenges of the method and design ideas for diary studies. And then we will do a short final reflection on how our diary study participants have challenged the method. And then we'll open up for a wider Q&A. So that's what we've got ahead of us. So just a couple of words about the diary method community. I think some of you here present are already members of the community, but for those who haven't thought about it before, but might be interested in diary method, we have an online community of practice aimed to build expertise and share experience in diary method. And this is because there's not a great deal of say research training or that many methods on that many experts in diary methods. So we try to create that expertise as a community ourselves. And I convene this with Ahmed Akkad and Dangni, my co-conveners. And the platform, it's a WordPress platform and it includes a resources page, but we also hold events and a monthly online reading group. And we have a mailing list as well. All of these things can be accessed from the platform. You don't have to be using it. You could just be interested in diary method to come along and find out what we do. So that's us. So I'll move now to my introduction to diary method. And like I say, this is really going to be a whistle-stop tour. I'll move relatively quickly. But of course, you can come back and look at the diary method community resources page afterwards if you're interested in reading more, or learning more about the method. So I want to sort of start my introduction by drawing on 4 of the very few books out there on diary method. I had a look recently, I couldn't find any new ones, but who knows, there may be some out there. And I've taken a kind of snippet from each of them to say something about why we might be interested in diary method or what might mark it out. So just to look at Alazowski's, first of all, 2006 volume, something it's just worth kind of putting out there is that while the literature, and this was back in 2006, while the literature on the use of diaries for research is growing, it just doesn't match other methods for social research. And that's still true even almost 20 years later, that there's, you know, a million things out there on interviewing. Diary methods still relatively underrepresented in the methodological literature. Bartlett and Milligan, from their 2015 volume, remark that everyone understands the idea of a diary. We've all kept a diary for various reasons and in various ways. And this is part of the intrigue of diary research, that we sort of generally understand diaries from calendars to personal reflective journals, but where they kind of cross over into research is a bit more mysterious. And this leads me to Hayer's quote from the 2018 volume, and Laurie is, I think, here today. Hello, Laurie. With a quote that I love: diary method is somewhat off the beaten path, a bit mysterious and even kitschy. And this is both why it can be so appealing, and also at the same time, there can be some suspicion towards diary method. What is it? And it was sort of in the context of these three books that with Shuimeng Cao, we co-edited a volume on diary method in higher education research in 2021. And we identified that there are kind of some challenges around using diary method. One of them is around gatekeeping and the fact that lots of senior academics, if they're unfamiliar with diary method, they can block its usage or question it or subject it to more critique than other methods, and even prevent it being used in PhD studies, etc. And some of this gatekeeping spirit can lead to more reluctance to use it. So a sense among early career researchers, or really researchers of any career stage, being reluctant to use it because they don't feel they know enough about it or have the expertise. And then finally, a challenge is that when it is used, it can be subject to inappropriate use or unimaginative use, because everyone sort of opts for the safest, simplest version. And I think we'll be reflecting on that a little bit in our presentation today. So that's just to give a bit of a flavour of some of the thinking we might need to do around diary research. To go into some of the basics, firstly, it's really important that we distinguish between unsolicited diaries and solicited diaries. So unsolicited diaries are those that pre-exist the research. So it may be, you know, a kind of diary kept by someone in their sort of 19th century attic that's been unearthed in an archive of this kind of diary. Can also be an online blog that was just kind of written for the sake of it. And often this kind of unsolicited diary might be subject to historical analysis, generally qualitative analysis, and they also stand alone because the original writer doesn't tend to be available for, say, a follow-up interview. Now, the kind of diary we're reflecting on more in our presentation today is around solicited diaries, which are created and collected specifically for research purposes. And as I'll go on to say in a minute, solicited diaries cover really the full range of epistemological and theoretical positions. There's a huge variety of ways in which diary method can be used, and can be analysed across quantitative and qualitative methods, and are often combined with other methods like interviews. So to zoom in a little bit more on solicited diaries, so there's generally a framing around them being extremely structured, and that can be from literally kind of choose A, B, C option and just reply with that, to very unstructured or semi-structured to completely blank notebook or document, you know, write what you feel. It really can vary hugely. And there are all kinds of forms of diary as well. They can be a written diary, paper, online, can be photo diaries, videos, audio diary, collage, combinations, use of app. There's just all kinds of different forms of diary. And then diaries can be intensive. You know, you can do a diary study over one day, or you can do a diary study over months or years. So I hope you're beginning to see the sheer variety of uses of diary method. If I need to sell it at all, here is some reasons why one might choose to use diary method within a study. So the first thing is for a phenomenon that changes over time. So anything that changes over time, and other methods might just take a single snapshot and don't therefore capture that dynamic process. The diary can be useful for tracking that. Secondly, a phenomenon that involves sensitive information that's hard to talk about. So, you know, many studies use interviews, but if it's about a topic where someone may find it just actually quite hard to express themselves, or as I say in the next box, who might be intimidated by facing an interviewer or trying to find the words, the diary actually gives participants time and space on their own to find the words that they want to use to express themselves. A further use, and this is partly why diary method experienced a huge resurgence or maybe surgence in the pandemic, is that they can be used to research a phenomenon that's occurring at a distance from you, or indeed in a setting that you cannot access. So during the pandemic, you know, all the kind of ethnographers began to reach for diary method because they couldn't go and do participant observation, for instance. So, but equally, yeah, if it's in a setting where your document or your diary can reach it, but you can't, it's really good to use that. And finally, a phenomenon that includes ephemeral or forgettable features. So where you might be really interested in the micro or mundane, or what seems mundane, everyday interactions, a diary is really good for tracking those that when it comes to an interview, participants might have, you know, completely forgotten what they thought at that time. So these are 6 reasons to choose diary method. And I'm going to now talk through some choices and considerations to make when choosing diary method. And again, I'm sort of going through these in a very overarching way, and we will be touching on these much more in relation to our specific studies shortly. So firstly, there are all kinds of decisions to make around study design. So what format of diary will you choose? You know, I showed that there are all kinds of different format available, and that needs to be the basis of the decision. Like who's filling it in, and what do you need to think about what format you'll choose. And then there's the question of what we call sampling in diary method, which is around how you're going to sequence your entries. Is it that you ask participants to fill in the diary every day at a kind of regular interval? Or is it that you'll make it an event-based diary, that when the thing happens that you're tracking, whether it's from doing homework or having an asthma attack, that you will have the diary entry written as soon as possible after that event? And then there are questions around how the diary will be handled. How will it be sent to participants, and how will they submit their entries back to you as a researcher? And how will you remind them or not to fill in the diary? So these are all the considerations around designing, or some of the considerations around designing your diary study. An issue that comes up a lot in terms of researchers' concerns in using diary method is around how will I convince participants to get involved, and that's something we will come back to in this presentation, as well as how will you keep them? How will you get that rapport with the participants to ensure that they stay with you and keep completing the diary potentially over a longer period? Another concern that gets raised to me quite a lot is around the administrative burden of managing diary data. How do you manage all of those entries coming in, or how will you, collect them all in one go at the end? And how will you keep on top of all of that, maybe transcription you might need to do of the handwritten entries, or how are you going to manage all of that? And how are you going to manage the fact that while the diary study is ongoing, the participants are sort of your responsibility to keep them interested? Another common concern that comes up is around variation in the quality and quantity of entries, and that can include too much as well as too little data. So how will you design the diary so that it kind of leads to that quality data, that it's clear that participants know what they're doing and they're motivated? And how will you keep them going during the duration if it's a longer study? There's a consideration that comes up as well around the fact that there's a reactivity question in diary studies I think every method has some potential modification of behavior. You know, whether we do a standalone interview or even a survey, it could make us think differently about how we live our lives. But it's sort of recognized that keeping a diary over an extended period about something can actually either have positive or negative implications for behavior. And it's not, we can't actually prevent that. So how to design a diary allowing for the fact that it may have a transformative effect on participants' lives. And then a final consideration that I'm mentioning here is around the ethical issues relating to the personal and private content that may be shared in diaries. So, you know, the fact that you may be, depending on the study, asking for sensitive or personal data to be provided. Will participants remember that they're participating in a research study? You know, if they start thinking, oh, this is my personal diary, and they might share things that actually in the end they would prefer you not to know as a researcher. And will their data actually be safe? So these are some choices and considerations that come up very often and come up often actually as reasons people have even decided not to use diary method. So I thought it was best to bring them all out now, and we'll give further food for thought as we go through our presentation. So I'm going to hand over to Julia now to talk through her doctoral study. Thanks, Julia.
Thank you, Emily. Yes, I'm looking forward to be sharing more about my PhD project with you, and especially see this presentation as an opportunity to really deep dive into the diary method, which was one of the methods that I've used for my PhD research. So my research was about co-researching with primary school learners together their lived experiences of sustainability education. And for this, I went into 2 primary schools in Scotland and New Zealand that are already highly engaged with sustainability education beyond the curriculum. And that really means that it's not only about subject knowledge and seeing sustainability and the climate crisis being embedded in geography or the sciences, but more holistically and widely into a whole school approach. So that's also looking into sustainable practices of schools' operational side of things, into the community initiatives, into professional development of teachers, the overall vision of the school, so basically everywhere. And I wanted to understand, what do pupils see? What do they experience on the ground? And using a creative kind of co-research methodology here, I invited them as co-researchers on board in both of these contexts to find out so what it is that they experience as learning for sustainability. Do they see it only in these kind of what I mentioned as siloed subject knowledge in these subjects? Do they refer to it in outdoor lessons? Do they recognize what the school is doing with their solar panels on the rooftop or in their attempts to reduce carbon footprint or any of that? Is it visible or clear to the children? So ultimately it was about understanding how do learners define sustainability education within their own kind of school's context based on their own kind of lived experiences. So the aim behind this was really to help better understand these lived experiences together with them, and through a co-research methodology, help also raise learners' awareness of such, because oftentimes they are not even aware of this. And I wanted to support pupils through a variety of different design-led and reflexive means. And one of this was the diary method that really created a reflexive space in our overall kind of co-research journey together. Before I dive into the diary method, I just want to say that I did not only work with the learners, but to understand this holistic picture of what sustainability education was about at each of these schools in 2 case studies. I also worked with the teachers, so that really helped later on for the analysis of the diary specifically, but more so to really understand what pupils would refer to and what the teacher's perspective of this event, this experience was. So helping contextualizing the findings here as well. And to point out, because it's often a question in sustainability education research, which is the best approach, which is more effective, is Scotland better than New Zealand? In these 2 contexts, very interestingly, we are already seeing progressive policy approaches towards education for sustainability, and being at schools that are already highly engaged, there is a certain higher level than maybe compared to other schools on average. But it was more the attempt to find out what can be learned from a learner's perspective about the impact that a school sustainability education approach can have on the learner. And that's something I wanted to find out with the pupils together. So next slide, please. So how did the diary design look? As Emily already mentioned, these can look very different across many different diary studies. I chose to go down a more creative side of the diary studies. For context, I was working with 21 primary school learners in both contexts, aged between 8 and 12. This is the white age group is because of working with 1 year group in one school and with a mixed year group in the other school. And I had the chance to spend 5 to 7 weeks in each school, and not only was I at the school for the co-researcher sessions, but I also tried to spend as much time as possible in those weeks with them together to really get a sense of their everyday, to use participant observation and also field note taking to help understand the context of the school. We did the diary, we completed the diaries together. This sounds a bit like challenging, and I will talk about this at the very end again, but we came together as one co-researcher group sitting at one table, sitting next to each other, and we're working on our diary entries at a specific point in time of the co-researcher session. And we had one open-ended question. So it was an event-based diary design, but just very semi-structured in the way that it was just one question and a subtitle that I come to in a second to explain this to you in more detail. We had 1 to 2 lessons on average per week, and in each lesson we would spend time on one diary entry. There were sometimes the cases that pupils would want to go back to their diary entry from the other session because they felt it wasn't finished yet. So it was kind of 1 to 2 entries per session or per week, were done. Where were the diaries stored? This was quite confidential to kind of help make the diary kind of a private space for them and not be accessible all the time. They were kept in a certain research box in the classroom, and all our materials were stored in there, but only the teacher and I had access to it, and the pupils had to ask either of us if they wanted to have access to their own diary beyond the co-researcher session. I also had the chance to undertake kind of post-diary conversations, more informally held with the pupils, and this is particularly done in diary studies to kind of get a better sense after the diary study of what the participants have referred to, and talk about it and draw on some experiences or events and get some more detail from the participants around that to help sense make or analyze the diaries. And doing that with pupils is a different kind of experience, but having kind of shorter, informal post-diary conversations was a great way to understand the overall experience of what it's like to have a diary as a young person, and also what the whole kind of co-research experience has been like. So it's really interesting how this has informed going from one school to the other in terms of the diary design and knowing kind of the experience from pupils because of that. Final point on this slide, obviously the diary method was complemented by, like, as I said before, a wider kind of co-researcher creative engagement, and each session would have the diary at the center. We would kick off the session with some dialogues around sustainability and coming really from different angles to help sense make or discuss the abstract topic of sustainability from various different angles, have the diary method, and then end the session with some letter writing or some visual mapping to really get them back together and open up like a collective thinking space, again, around the topic of sustainability education, but have the diary method separately, just to give you some context around that. But we want to, next slide, please. We want to look more into kind of what the diaries looked like. And here they are, very, very visual and very beautiful. I must say I'm very biased here. But the diary question that the children were working with was, what did you learn today that you connect with sustainability? And this question was intentionally broadly defined because you could also argue, why isn't it focused on maybe a subject topic such as food waste or transport. So I could have zoomed much more into depth here, but I wanted to have, and this question was also co-formulated with the teachers, I wanted to have this intentionally broad question to invite a range of different responses from each pupil, and to also encourage them to define what sustainability education looks like in their specific context and what it personally means to them. And that's why this formulation of the diary. You can't really see here the subtitle too well, apologies, but I've kind of designed the diaries myself. I've cut them, I've bound them, and I wanted to make kind of the design also in a way for the pupils so that they could color the questions and the letters. But the subtitle that you can see here is about, think about what happened today in your lessons, in your breaks, with your friends or teachers, outside or inside lessons, at home, that made you just think of sustainability, nature, climate change, all of these topics. And it was not meant in a directive way, but rather to, as a prompt to think about, oh, what has happened today? Because it's long school days, really, and maybe to give them something to think about when I wasn't directly with them, although I was sitting next to them often enough. So going into the diary entries, you can see here on the left-hand side already one entry that I was really expecting when I was designing this study in terms of the level of literacy skills that you can see here, in terms of the written word that is shown, but also on the right-hand side, how visually pupils would express themselves, but still have the written word. But also I was expecting diary entries to be more about reflecting on their own behavior. So reflecting on when this pupil here said, I helped my friends make a bee hotel at second break and ate all my snack. You can see these topics coming out in terms of food waste and spending time outside and help make something like project-based or something around, informal spaces at break time. So these kind of codes come out, but overall pupils tended really quite strongly to just reflect on their environmental behavior and what is kind of environmentally friendly. On the right-hand side, you could see a very beautiful depiction of the outdoor lessons. And here the diary method really could capture over time, and that's also why the diary method is so powerful, over time, how the outdoor lessons developed. And in this case, they were, every time we went outside, this would in the next session be in the diaries. And it was great also kind of how they combined their learnings from these lessons in their diary entry making. And here the teacher figure says, we got clay from a natural resource and the flower is taken from a garden space. So very like, in terms of data, can I really deal with that? I'm just realizing I'm frozen. Can you still see me, or am I frozen to you as well? It's fine.
We can hear you just fine, Julia,
Mm-hmm.
but you did freeze momentarily.
Okay, but I'm hopefully back now.
Yeah, you're back now. Yeah.
Great. So to just end on this slide, it was beautiful to see over time, each time we were outside, that they would put this into their diaries. And the teacher's project on a clay dragon was really tracked in that way in the pupils' diaries, from digging up the clay in the grounds of the school to kind of working clay in the classroom and outdoors, planning kind of the dragon shape, and then seeing, and that was kind of a happenstance in parallel to the research project, how the clay dragon at the very end came to life. And pupils really depicted this in much detail, and also with clay and with grass and with flowers, as you can see in the diary entries. With these two, you can already see a range of different diary entries from each pupil, but when we go to the next slide, you can also see that something surprising comes up when you use the diary method with this kind of particular age group, because on the other slide, I could expect these topics to come through, but also what I wasn't expecting and what was surprising is how the diary space really became for pupils a space to share emotional responses. And you can see it in a very indirect way here with this example of one pupil depicting herself being in the allotment area during a break time with a friend. And this was kind of done. for the diary entry. And then she wanted also to express her feelings towards kind of how humans' behavior is really impacting, in this very picture, animals' habitats. And you can see how putting or giving voice to the fish here and putting feelings into their kind of speech bubbles or expressions of frustrations and so on, the sea creatures do not like it. This was never put into pupils' own words or own speech bubbles, interestingly. Also caution here to not over-interpret kind of diary entries from pupils. So here it was really necessary for me to go back to field notes, go back to audio recordings, and go back to kind of the whole day, what has happened, to understand what this reference is about, and if it's kind of more like a nice picture that was drawn, or actually kind of something that they wanted to express and cared about behind this picture. When we move on to the next slide, we can see that not only the diaries created space for pupils' emotional responses, but what was necessary so that the diary method could become alive was to have really this report building and this whole co-researcher collective experience that complemented the diary method to help feel comfortable with the method over time. And you can also see it when you see kind of the data set. After week 1, pupils felt really comfortable enough and more free, if I may say so, to just use very different means to express what they wanted to say. And on the right-hand side, you can see here how they played with the mud, and you don't want to know how messy the table looked like and how this went in the session. Wonderful. We tidied up together. It was an experience, but it was just their method. They made them their own, and they felt comfortable because of this kind of group experience, and also sticking to this routine that we've set up. So they grew into kind of feeling confident in using it. And also you can see on the right-hand side how this comment, using nature for art makes me feel calm. That's one of the rare kind of moments in all of these diaries where they really expressed emotions like in a very concrete and written way, and not just through visuals, as I said, as we've seen before in the other entry. So really interesting how over time this really changed, and how this whole co-researcher experience contributed to the diary method and the data quality, I would say. Yeah, next slide, please. So I've given you some insights into what the diaries looked like, and also touched already on some of the challenges. And I want to zoom in really on the diary again, and talk about how the collective entry making in the classroom was really a challenge. Sitting side by side with the pupils, and everybody had the chance to see what the other one would write or draw about. It was really necessary to set up this research culture around the table, literally, to introduce pupils. We spent a whole session just talking about research, introducing them to the project, talking about consent, and also what's necessary when we work together, that we are not laughing about each other's entries, that, you know, this is a private space as much as possible for each and every one of us. And this as well grew just over time, developed over time into this quieter time of the co-researcher session, and everybody was just very zoned in and would be busy with their diary entry making. But at some point though, and interestingly in both cases, the diary wasn't enough. And it sounds simple, but in the New Zealand case, I went first into the Scottish case and then into the New Zealand one. And in the New Zealand one pupil had the idea of making a card game instead of a diary entry that day. And I was, on the outside, I was like, yeah, great idea, go on. Let's try this out, because it's under the umbrella of participatory action research. That's what you want, kind of developing the sense of agency and ownership of the participants to take, to some degree with this age group, like over. Wonderful. But on the inside, I was like, oh God, it challenged really me personally. And I think here, I want to say two things here, because you could say, oh, maybe they challenged you just and wanted to test you. And they did. They tested me as an outsider coming in, and both groups were really willing to test me to the fullest in terms of how I would respond to what diary entry, whether this was right or wrong. And they couldn't, you know, I was inviting every response, so they understood that it's not about assessing, like that their work didn't get assessed. They tested me in ways how I would, if I would laugh with them or be very strict, you know, this age group, how they kind of play with that in that regard. But I think once they felt, and I want to go back to the point I made earlier, once they felt comfortable with this situation, with this co-research experience, with me being not a new face anymore, but a familiar one slowly, and spending so much time with them outside of these sessions, I felt that this challenging the diary method with kind of this card game idea was actually challenging the method in ways that they wanted not just to talk about it or to draw and write about these kind of abstract topics and put it somewhere, but actually what they wanted to do and what they did was reflection through making. So they still talked about all these sustainability topics while they were making the card game. And just in hindsight, I realized they would do this as well in the Scottish case, where they would collage a lot with the natural materials and flowers and grass, and they wanted to make something more hands-on, and which is also reflecting not only kind of, I guess, the learner's preferences individually, but also more widely the kind of school's more hands-on approach to sustainability things, where it was a lot about making and going outdoors and getting this kind of experiential learning bit in. Final 2 points. Obviously, the analysis of the visual data was surprising. I obviously expected that there was a lot of visual data to be covered. I was hoping for written and textual data a lot, but I think it is also to say that most of the times my co-researcher time with them was in the afternoons or after lunch. So pupils weren't really, in terms of their attention span, that was difficult already, but there was a tiredness around just, you know, they've written all day long poems or stories in literacy classes and so on, and they felt somehow this diary, as it was an open-ended question and they could do whatever they wanted, just invited their drawings. And what I first in the field thought as kind of a weakness, oh, how do I go about kind of actually analyzing this and stay true to what they wanted to express? Later on in the analysis, what they actually did express visually was so much more, or not more, but so rich still, and brought out these very much embodied knowing and their feelings, and somehow also this kind of knowledge that is difficult to express in words. When they wanted to share more about their nature connection and how they love being just outdoors. And that's difficult to put into words maybe, but expressing visually how they feel when they are outdoors, how they value and appreciate all the times the teachers make the effort to go outside with them. That's kind of how it turned and how the visual really became a strength of the diary entry then as well. And last point, it is the emotionality in the entries, and we've Emily touched on this in the beginning, saying how this is oftentimes underestimated in some ways. What I was expecting, because of the sustainability education field, obviously climate anxiety and climate emotions is a separate research angle that I could have taken, and is really becoming stronger and stronger in terms of the field itself from a psychological point of view as well. But so I was expecting that the diaries may create a space for kind of emotions to come through, but I wasn't really expecting how much or how intense, how strong these feelings were that they were expressing sometimes. And there are other examples that are going into an extreme that I didn't want to share specifically. And also, how do I go about as a researcher analyzing this emotionally heavy kind of topic? And I had to take it really step by step in the analysis to not just be confronted with this huge kind of climate anxiety and frustration about inaction and hopelessness about the future they are talking about in various different entries and also in their creative work outside of the diary entries then. So that was something I definitely took on as a challenge and had a lot of learnings from this challenge, because every challenge comes with a learning, right? Yeah, so I wanted to end here. I hope this has given you kind of a good overview of the project and zooming into some of the diary entries to give examples of how it looked like, the design, and also the challenges that I covered now in the last slide. So with that, I hand back to Emily.
Thanks so much, Julia. And if people have questions and comments for Julia, please do make a note of them or put them in the chat. And because we're going to cover my project now and then open up for discussion of our two presentations. And I must say, I just have a lot of admiration for the process that you followed, Julia. It's really beautiful, the diaries that you ended up with, and the process that you followed as well. It was so rich and rigorous. So I feel like now the study I'm going to show looks a lot more boring in terms of the diary, but I think you'll also understand why it kind of had to be that way possibly next. So I'm going to talk through what is really quite a contrasting diary study to try and show some of the breadth and the reasons why we end up with the kind of breadth across different participant groups. And again, some of you in this room, I think, are already familiar with this project, but I will assume no knowledge. So this was a project that was a team project a couple of years ago, focusing on what we called pre-application doctoral communications, or PADC. And we were focusing on the communications that potential doctoral applicants have with university staff before they make an application to study. So this is a whole informal area of pre-admission activity that happens before anyone makes a formal application for a doctoral study. And the forms of PADC mainly include emails, most commonly from a potential applicant to a potential supervisor. And for anyone who's attending internationally, this is quite a UK-based process of trying to secure a supervisor before gaining admission. I know in some sectors elsewhere in other countries, you gain admission and then locate a supervisor once you're in the process. But in the UK, our admission works usually around locating a supervisor first, and that might include applying to a scientific project to work on it that has kind of allocated PI a supervisor already. So other forms, aside from emailing a potential supervisor, include staff members emailing each other about potential applicants, or having video calls or office drop-ins with potential applicants before they submit an application. And the whole point of us researching this completely kind of neglected and under-researched area, although now there's more attention being paid, is that essentially what happens through this moment of doctoral communications is that university staff can essentially either enable applicants to gain access to the formal admission process and therefore ideally to doctoral education, or they can actually end up sometimes unintentionally blocking access to doctoral education, because if no potential supervisors reply, or if they say, no, I'm unable to supervise, obviously we know there are all kinds of reasons that might happen. It may mean that someone can't go ahead and actually apply for study. And we sort of know from our own experiences, and for a while I was also the director of the doctoral program in my department, and I had a lot of consultation with colleagues around this. I know that that supervisors make snap judgments. Often they've got way too many emails coming in. They get kind of 3 students saying, hello, will you supervise me? And you know, they'll be looking for like very quick clues, like oh, that's not really my area, or oh, that's not a country I'm very familiar with, or I've never heard of the university where they got their undergraduate, and then they just say no thank you. And the fact that these sort of snap judgments are occurring means that often it's kind of students from minoritized groups, underrepresented students, who get disadvantaged in these moments, because they often have less access to key informants or reliable sources to explain like how to approach a supervisor, or which kind of universities they might want to consider for their topic or whatever. So we were sort of aware that there are untracked inequalities probably opening up. While universities are often tracking their admission stats, this kind of phase of pre-admission activity is often completely under the radar, and we wanted to look into it a bit more to see who is kind of not getting through and what decisions are being made based on these kind of communications. So then the project that we followed, and it was kind of a two-project if you like, in that we had two sequential grants from the Enhancing Research Culture Fund at Warwick. And you can see the design. It was an institutional case study with multi-method design. And on this slide, you can see the mainly the first study. I want to say it was led by James Burford. He was the PI, and I was responsible, along with Ahmed Akkad, who was a research assistant for the project at that time. I was responsible for the diary study. And the diary study was sort of nested in amongst semi-structured interviews with directors of postgraduate research and with programme officers. And then the solicited diaries were with supervisors, and we had focus group discussions with them as well. And we also included in the second phase interviews with self-identified minoritized students who'd made it through the admissions process to understand how they got there. And what kind of challenges they faced, as well as what enabled them to, say, find a supervisor, etc. And we also did a study of YouTube videos that were about advice for doctoral applicants, to try and understand those who are accessing advice from informal YouTube sources, how reliable or not, or what kind of messages are being given from those sources. So the diary study you can see here, it was a 6-week diary study with doctoral supervisors, so 19 participants. And they completed an online form via the Qualtrics program. And we didn't have any choice about using Qualtrics. This is one of the things that comes up, what universities will permit you to use as a platform. So we had to use Qualtrics. And it was very much a kind of fairly structured / semi-structured design. I'll say more about that in a second. So the 19 supervisors over the 6-week period were contacted by 60 applicants. So we could see the 19 supervisors' reactions to 60 applicants, what they actually did with those applicants contacting them. So 60 is really, it was quite a good pool to try and track some of the things that were going on. And the supervisors were very much across the 3 Warwick faculties, which spans all disciplinary areas. And while for this study we didn't do follow-up interviews that were personal to the diaries, we arranged follow-up focus group discussions with the same supervisors that kept the diaries, and encouraged them to, they'd all done quite a lot of reflection on what they were doing with these applicants' emails during the 6 weeks, and then they had a chance to 11 of them signed up to discuss this in more detail, sort of without referring to their diaries necessarily, because they were quite confidential, but they kind of reflected in more detail in these focus group discussions. And what we were really trying to dig through to is like how the doctoral communications are going on, and is there anything that institutions might be able to do to help somehow reduce some of the inequalities opening up in this area. And we produced a report, briefings, and we produced our own YouTube advice video for applicants, and we did workshops with supervisors and other staff members at Warwick and beyond. Okay, so zooming in a bit more on the specifics of the diary study. So we designed the diary to try to take a kind of 5-minute period of entry each week. And this was because of the participant group it was the perception and based on quite a lot of piloting and pre-study discussion that academics certainly feel very busy. You know, the idea of saying, like, could you participate in a reflection for an hour a week would mean that we probably wouldn't get anyone signing up for it. So we almost had to sell the study on the basis that it'll be over in a minute. Please don't don't be put off. And we also knew that given that these academics were scattered across the university, there was no way I could ask them to come and sit around a table as in Julia's study. So they somehow had to have access to the diary like in some way online, so that we could kind of ask them to fill it in. So we actually sent the link to our Qualtrics form every Friday with a friendly email reminder. Ahmad led on this and often included some personal kind of greeting or thanks so much for the previous entry to show that there's a human being going on there. And we included two forms. One, there was a pre-diary kind of participant form, and then there were two forms as part of the study. One was for a new applicant. So if a new applicant had contacted the person that week, they filled in that form. If they had any ongoing actions from previous applicants in the diary study, they could fill in the second form and say, oh, with regard to that applicant, this happened this week. So in that sense, at least over the 6-week period, we could see, or like 3 weeks later, they had a kind of informal chat with the applicant or whatever. So that was sort of what we had. And you can see on the right-hand side here that the kind of basic questions of the diary. So you can see that the questions are quite short and don't necessarily require like detailed information. Like we were looking for one-word answers, or we had some select all that apply answers. And then we had that kind of question 9, which allowed for more or less reflection around comments, thoughts, feelings about their actions and the reason behind it. So we were able to capture some basic information. You can see it really is a kind of 5-minute process, unless you want to write more. But most of the participants really kept it very brief. But we got quite a lot of information out of it. And it was important to us to share the whole diary with participants at the end of the study, so that they could see what they had submitted. So we turned all the forms that they'd submitted into a PDF and sent it to them at the end of the study. And then, as I've said, they were also invited to participate in a focus group discussion. So that's the sort of overview of the study. And now I want to just move to some of the kind of challenges and insights. So some of the challenges around recruitment that I mentioned even back in my intro to diary studies presentation at the beginning, they did kind of come true, that it was quite difficult to recruit academics to the study. And we ended up having to use quite a lot of our personal networks across the university to locate participants. And it's possible that therefore, given that that we as a team we're quite known for being kind of quite left-wing and feminist and kind of interested in social action, and it's possible that our study may have captured more than usual reflective participants in the same kind of mindset. But we really did try to reach out to people from that we'd encountered in professional development workshops and all kinds of things. So, but it took quite a lot of work to get the 19. And I know you can't really see the graph very carefully, but the majority of the participants were in social sciences, where we were located as a team as well. Something I want to kind of bring up about diary studies with academics, and I've done quite a few now, is that academics have really strong feelings about research and like to comment on study design, the timing of the study, all sorts of things from their disciplinary perspectives. So we had to respond to quite a few people getting in touch, and we were actually obliged by the funding period to conduct the diary study in term 3, which in the UK is possibly the least active time for doctoral admissions. And we had lots of people kind of writing to us to say this won't get you a representative sample, etc., etc. And we ourselves were tracking how many requests for supervision we were receiving, because a lot of applicants from different countries in which have different admission cycles don't know that term 3 is not the main time to contact someone. So we were confident that we would have quite a few applicant contact happening, even though it was term 3, but had to keep writing back to academics and saying, no, this diary method does exist, it is a thing, and yes, there is a point to conducting it at this time of year. But that's certainly one thing of working with, I guess, what perhaps any high level professional participants will have feel like they would like to give feedback on the study. I'd like to hear maybe from Julia if her participants also gave her feedback on her study later. We had some instances, and this is the red, you can see the area of the graph that I've circled there. 3 of our supervisors had no contact from potential students during the study period. And this actually led to some feelings of, I think the problem is, as a diary participant, is if you're having no instances of the phenomenon, you have absolutely no idea if someone else is having instances. So you almost have a sense that maybe in the void, maybe that the diary study is failing and you're somehow contributing to it, or maybe you feel like you're left out somehow. And, people were really quite apologetic or a little concerned and maybe thought that maybe no one was receiving any entries, whereas actually you can see that all the other supervisors received up to 14 applicant contact during the 6-week period. I think we very much designed the diary around this fact that academics, we anticipated they would be unwilling to spend much time on the diary. And I do think we were right in that, and it was based on piloting, and it was even based on like pre-piloting. Jamie and I both kept the diary ourselves and thought about what was annoying about it. And we really, it was quite annoying to try and think, to try and remember, who's contacted me this week? And, we were aware that we were asking people to not just spend more time on their email, but find emails and work out what happened that week. So we really did try and make it as painless as possible. But the problem was, of course, that we completely omitted creative expression. And who knows if we'd given academics access to soil and flowers, and who knows what would have happened. And I know that others in this network have tried many more creative methods with academics, not least Harriet, to kind of get different ways forward. But I suppose in this instance, we felt very strongly that we were researching a really hidden phenomenon, and that it would be quite a contribution to the work on doctoral admissions that's happening to reveal that the pre-admission stage is a point of gatekeeping and a point of inequality in doctoral education admission. So I think we sort of felt with the greater aim, we wanted the diary study to succeed and to produce even like numerical data that institutional policymakers are more likely to read. So that was sort of the rationale behind quite a dull looking study, I guess. Just a couple of final things. So we we sent that email on the Friday and asked participants to complete it. And a few times that kind of missed the fact that some of the communications happened during the weekend, not just academics being sent them, but also them responding to them. And I guess we wanted to embed the diary in the working day. There's no way I would have wanted anyone's phone to ping on a Sunday afternoon asking people to complete a diary. But the fact that we almost claimed that the end of the week was Friday, in the knowledge that at the same time, given the kind of work patterns of many academics, that that was not really the end of the week. So we had some confusion about, and participants sort of almost saying, I've put it in this week because this is where I think it goes. But there was confusion about that. And the final thing I want to say is that our piloting process, and that includes our pre-pilot, showed us that academics needed perhaps a surprising amount of support and routine to participate in the diary study. And we actually ended up doing things like use color coding. So I mentioned 2 different forms, and they had, a different color for each form, so we could refer to the color of the form. And we gave very clear examples of like completing it, and we gave them the weekly email with the link. And we took away a lot of participant autonomy scope from the study. And I feel like, in a way, we almost ended up infantilizing participants. But at the same time, I think because participants were just giving up off such vibes of kind of saying, oh, that's too much information. Oh, I need, that was sort of, even though academics have to deal with a huge amount of information all the time, that was sort of, that vibe came through, that we need to make it almost like so simple that a very young child could follow the study as well as an academic. So those are some features, if you like, insights of 2 completely different diary studies on different topics with different types of diary and different participant groups. And we want to pause now on our presentation, and we want to open up for discussion. So firstly, we'd love your insights. Given the projects that we've introduced, how would you have designed the diary studies? Is there anything you would have done differently? And then for those of you who are using diary method already, do challenges and insights that we've mentioned resonate with your experiences? Or also, if any of you are considering using it, what are your kind of anticipated concerns? Does this resonate? And I want to specify that we're going to come back and give you a few more points after this, and then open up for much more general Q&A. So if you've got more general questions about diary method, you can also park those and come back to them. So I think I might unshare my my screen, thinking through this session in the first place, of almost who does the diary method belong to? To what extent does it belong to the researcher who's designing the whole study, or can we say it belongs to participants? And we think that the method was sort of challenged by our participants in bizarrely quite common ways, even though we had really different participant groups. So we thought, put our heads together and thought about the ways in which our participants challenged all of the meticulous and thought through ways that we set up our studies, and almost claimed back in some sense the method that we were using. I'll make the first couple of points, and then I'll hand over to Julia for the last 3. So we can clearly say that in both of our studies, we prioritised participant retention and quality of data. And we can say that arguably we prioritize that over freedom in some senses, freedom of recording or recording conditions. And the follow-up points do refer to this, but I guess that consideration I aired right at the beginning of the session, that keeping hold of participants and ensuring that some data happens is just two of the biggest fears that diary method researchers have. And I can certainly say in my study that, and you saw it very clearly, that we kind of excluded freedom of expression of participants through having this really structured form, just to make sure that we had the data that we were looking for and were able to keep participants going for the 6 weeks. And in Julia's study, you saw that she followed quite a kind of clear routine process, which she'll talk more about in a minute, but that and had a sort of a book as well, a kind of pre-printed book. It was all set up to mean that everyone could keep going and keep delivering. So we did sort of, in that sense, when we were thinking through the needs of our participants, that very much shaped the diary studies that we entered into. So in that sense, although we designed the diary for the participants, in a sense, the needs of the participants meant that we designed it in a particular way. And in that sense, the diary design was really significantly affected by what we could call the anticipated challenges of retention. In order to make the experience easy and comfortable, in anticipation of what would not be easy and what would not be comfortable. That meant that the diary took a particular form, and maybe not a form that was what we might have wished for, or we might have wanted in some different reality. So maybe I'll hand over to Julia at this point.
Yes, and also in terms of the research environment, it was interesting how both studies required really an institutional base, whether that was like in person and virtually then for Emily's study as in higher education institutions during working hours, and in the other case in a formal education space at a primary school during kind of the school day. And usually in diary studies, it's quite common to invite participants with the flexibility of this diary study writing up the diary entry in their own time at home, wherever they want to, and then submit it or when it's due. And this wasn't the case here. Instead, that's the next point, it required really what Emily already talked about, a very structured routine and different and indeed high levels of support to just get participants to complete the diary or to complete an entry then. And we've seen it that it wasn't really just about trusting participant autonomy, but with the Warwick study being like sending out reminders after reminders and using color coding then on top again to get something from them was quite important. And then in my study as well, this structured routine of setting up this research space with a diary on the table already, with the research box and ready to go, and following each session a certain kind of structure that pupils get used to over time and felt comfortable after a couple of sessions then was really helpful. And just we needed that in order to get the data from the diaries then. And as a final point, in both studies we've seen, and we've talked about this in each of our presentations, but participants really found their own ways of challenging the structured and routine processes we had set up, and ultimately then the diary method. And we've seen that they also kind of challenged us kind of personally as the researcher to then respond to this challenge in different ways by adding another level of support with the color coding we heard, or with the kind of reaching out again and again, and also then with the primary school pupils to accept that it's a different kind of participant group, a different learning characteristics and preferences also in place. Also telling us a lot about the research environment back then, like referring back to where it takes place and how the research environment shapes the study then and shapes the diary method, which shapes kind of the participants' responses that we are very much interested in. So yeah, whose diary method is it? That was our question, to bring also our both projects together and just explore what were the challenges around that question in our both projects. And we hope we've given you interesting kind of food for thought, reflections, maybe also in your own projects. And maybe when we go to the next slide, Emily, if that's okay already. Yes, we want to say a big thank you before we open up the floor again for the Q&A, obviously, but thank you to Harriet and Jackie for inviting us to come to the NTRM and present these very distinct projects together, and have this space to also reflect together in this space on this very interesting and non-traditional research method, which is the diary. It's great to have that space here, so thank you very much. And if you want to check out the diary method webpage, look at, there are various resources and also kind of all the articles that we've been reading for the last years already, structured according to different diary types and formats as well. So very interesting to just have a look through what is maybe also applicable to your research interest or project that you want to design in the future. So I'll end here and open up for the Q&A.
Thank you so much. And Jackie and I extend similarly the thanks to you. That's been I've got so many questions, but I can see we've got loads of questions in the chat. So I'm not going to monopolise and abuse my position in this. I think we should go to those. So Jack, do you want to kick off with, I think there was a question from Laurie for Emily. Do you want to
I'm
do that
actually
one?
going to hand over to Laurie and ask if she'd like to ask her own
Okay.
question.
Yeah, I'll just go to the second one because it relates to what your whole topic is. I have an echo. Do you have an echo?
No.
Okay. Do you think your studies led to consciousness raising about unusual research methods, diary research methods? And it was for Emily, but it could be for both of you.
Thanks so much, Laurie. Thanks for all of your questions. And I do kind of want to respond briefly to your first question about whether the study led to some consciousness raising among academics for their admission processes. And definitely, and this kind of came out in the focus group discussions around people sort of that it was sort of like they always realized that they all had their own personal policies for how to deal with these admission questions, and when they shared that, they sort of realized it wasn't a given, like that what the decisions they were making, others were